Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's a Ukrainian talk show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and I would like to announce our guest, the professor, Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you, Sasha. I'm glad to be here as always.
Okay, maybe Ivan will join us
I
during
hope
the
so too.
program. Sure, because obviously I wanted to ask him, but now I have to ask you because there is
oh,
no one
oh
else to
well,
ask.
that's them's the breaks.
So remember, on the last our program on Tuesday, I asked him what's happened with General Zaluzhny, and there are rumors, or almost rumors, that President Zelensky wants to actually sack him. And now it's more and more information that could be indeed the scenario. How would you see it, John? How would you comment on that?
It's probably a disagreement, a fundamental disagreement between Zaluzhny and Zelensky about the overall strategy, how the war should proceed in the next year, during this year 2024. There are two ways, realistically. Well, and there's a third way, which is surrender, which neither of them are going to entertain.
Of
But the
course.
question is, yeah, how do you approach waging the war against Russia in 2024? Do you take a purely defensive approach while you accumulate more qualitative weapons and obtain other means to eventually pursue a decisive counteroffensive in 2025? In the meantime, in 2024, you would concentrate on inflicting superior casualties on the Russian forces, continue to wear them down like a skillful boxer, destroy key elements of their defense, of their logistical systems, their intelligence systems, and continue to gain a more qualitative edge over Russian forces. But the primary thing would be a strategic defense rather than aiming at a decisive offensive counterstroke that would repel the Russians from a key portions of Ukrainian territory. In which case, the other school of thought would be look for a decisive opportunity for a counteroffensive in 2024, such as severing Russia from Crimea, so that the Ukrainians could commit their reserves then in a counteroffensive in 2024 that would be politically and militarily important enough that this would give Ukraine a very strong position not only with its allies but in eventually forcing Russia to an armistice. So there might well be a I would speculate, if there is indeed a true difference of opinion between Zelensky and Zelensky, that it's between those two competing approaches: stay on defense during 2024, consolidate, inflict superior casualties, or do the same thing but be more aggressive in looking for a decisive offensive counterstroke that would change the picture fundamentally overall for Ukraine. That's
Um,
way.
um, uh, Jonathan, is it in your opinion that General Zaluzhny wants to actually carry on defense during the 2024 and slowly prepare perhaps attack in 2025, and Zelensky wants to have more decisive approach and
That
try.
that would appear to be a sensible way to read the difference between the two men. One is looking at the political. Zelensky obviously is looking at the overall political importance of a decisive counterstroke. Zaluzhny, as a professional military man, is looking at the military balance and the positions in that he wants to conserve forces and look for an opening, look for a better counter, and preserve forces and consolidate defense, wear down the Russians, and he's not concerned about the overall about his political standing because he's a military man. He's looking at it from a purely military standpoint. And from that perspective, he wants to conserve forces and prevent military defeat of Ukrainian forces while at the same time wearing down the Russians. So one has political priorities, that's Zelensky. The other has military priorities, that's Zaluzhny.
Well, you know that I have a financial show on the network, Modern Investing, and my number one rule in investing is preservation of capital.
Hmm.
because you can be doing some risky stuff and it can work out for you 4 or 5 times, and a sixth time you may lose a great chunk of your capital, and
Hmm.
this will be
And
a
especially
irreparable damage.
when you are, especially when you are older, and you are at the end of, preservation of capital is paramount. Yeah, and
Absolutely.
you don't want to take big risks.
So
Yeah.
maybe this is why I personally prefer a solutionist approach, because the army, it's the only asset that Ukraine really has today. It
Right.
has nothing else, no industries, nothing. Uh, Army. This is
And interestingly enough,
99% of all the assets that Ukraine
and
has.
interestingly enough, Sasha, the military and the fact that Ukraine is building up its own defense industry, that
Yes.
is doubly important, because if Ukraine succeeds in building up its own independent defense industry, this, oddly enough, would become very valuable in any post-war environment for Ukraine, because now it has an industry, it has arms that it can actually export to other nations that would want to
Of
imitate and
course.
strengthen, and to other members of NATO. It would
Yeah.
help its integration not only in the European Union, but it would help its integration into NATO itself, as the other NATO nations look at Ukraine, what it's done, say, hey, we like those particular systems. Can we have some? And the
Absolutely.
Ukraine would say, certainly, says, oh, our prices are quite reasonable.
And especially that all the new weapons, what they're going to build, it will be NATO standards weapons.
Yes. So
There's
all of this is, in a very strange way, it makes sense, for it sounds strange. It's like, like Ukraine becoming weapons are us. So
there's also a political issue is that Zaluzhny is by any ratings are way much more popular than Zelensky. If election would be held today,
well,
he would
he's doing the
easily.
actual he's doing the actual fighting. That's not totally unusual, because, for example, in the United States, end of World War II, who became the next president after Truman? Well, the Republicans went to Eisenhower. He was the and he won 2 terms.
Yep.
And he is the only, I will point out, he is the only, well, yeah, you could technically include President Trump in this category, along with Eisenhower, because in both those terms, the United States did not get involved in any wars. There were no wars during the Eisenhower administration, and there were no new wars during the Trump administration. So actually, yeah, Trump comes in second, because the United States was still involved in wars, but in the Eisenhower administration, no wars whatsoever, which is to his everlasting credit.
Yeah, there were not crazies at that
Right.
time who would get into war
Oh,
with the United
and
States.
oh, by the way, budget wise, in terms of the national debt, during the Eisenhower administration, it was so conservative. If you look back, there were actually budget surpluses, not
Yeah,
budget deficits. I mean, the and the Eisenhower administration took a very cost-effective approach to national security strategy. The national security strategy, as described by John Foster Dulles, was the strategy of massive retaliation, which sounds incredibly belligerent when you think about when you look at it at first glance, but in reality, what it was doing, it was capitalizing on the fact that the U.S. had strategic nuclear superiority. The United States could strike the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union, at least until 1957, could not strike the United States. And so there are many sensible lessons which can be learned from this. And a sensible future national security strategy for a future U.S. administration would be to incorporate what I would call a strategy of asymmetric response. You do not respond in looking at your adversaries. You do not respond by copying what they are building. If they rely on their nuclear weapons arsenals, our response should not be build more nuclear weapons. No, that is not a proper response. A chess player would not respond in that way, because that's a losing approach. The strategy, like a good chess player, You respond in a way that your opponent is unprepared for and forces him to either respond or concede an advantage to you. That is why on numerous past programs, I have advocated that the US and NATO should strive towards building a global ballistic missile defense system, capitalizing on the demonstrated capabilities that they already have with Patriot and other systems of ballistic missile defense. They should improve the U.S., upgrade the U.S. Space Force to where it has a U.S. space fleet that is capable of conducting global ballistic missile defense, as well as fulfilling other planetary defense missions which would be needed. And so there are numerous creative and innovative ways, cost-effective ways that the United States and its NATO allies could respond to Russia, and by creating the means to neutralize nuclear weapons and make them, in the words of the late President Ronald Reagan, impotent and obsolete. Then remember, the Strategic Defense Initiative was only a research and development program, not an actual building program. The Russians
is so successful.
But it was so successful because the Russians believed it was that it was an actual building program. They were so terrified. You could tell this by the way they responded. I saw they were responding to Patriot back in 1985. They were in that Herald of Anti-Aircraft Defense article in January 85. The author believed that Patriot was an ABM system. He was correct about that. It did have an ABM capability, clever, but they overreacted. They claimed that it was for the strategic defense of the United States. They overstated its capability and potential, but yet that was an indicator of the deep-seated fear that the Russians had then and still have now of the potential of American technology to neutralize the one thing, even though they refuse to directly admit it, to neutralize the one thing that makes Russia a great power in its own estimation. Neutralize Russia's nuclear arsenal with ballistic missile defense, global, worldwide, and you have neutralized you have effectively, pardon the expression, you've effectively castrated them as a major power. They are completely impotent. And it would do, by extension, the same thing to China, to Iran, to North Korea, by neutralizing, in effect, all of their nuclear arsenals. And it would completely change the global balance of power, and it would enable the United States and its NATO allies to impose a prolonged period of strategic stability upon the world, preserve the status quo, preserve stability, at least for the rest of the 21st century, and quite possibly beyond.
Mm-hmm. Very, very interesting, and
that is the potential.
Maybe it's already being built.
You never know. We cannot be certain, because after all, you and I are operating in the open. You and I are operating as part of the array of media sources. And if you'll notice, there tends to be a lot of groupthink among media sources and among Western military analysts and various analysts who are trying to distinguish themselves and get attention. But in doing so, they also don't want to be caught out looking obviously wrong. And so, yeah, yes. And I will not. You can look at these people and you can see them all over the place. They are exhibiting various degrees of caution, but they're trying to look as erudite and informed and as insightful as possible, but they don't want to be caught out. And so they all fall into this kind of groupthink. So you notice that the vast majority of the experts out there are saying, oh, it's a stalemate. Oh, it could last for years. This is the common line that's going on. Oh, Ukraine may have to negotiate. No, it doesn't. It doesn't really have to negotiate. Go ahead.
Speaking about negotiations, this is another reason of the disagreement between Zelensky and Zelensky, because Zelensky does not believe in any negotiations whatsoever. He is prepared to have an active defense posture for another year and longer if needed, as long as he keeps his army intact. Now, Zelensky, of course, to make peace today with Russia, it's equal to capitulation. There's no mincing words. So I think Zelensky got involved with help of his friend Yermak into some negotiations, but not directly, openly with Russia. There are some negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, but not in the open. What they're trying to have, with the help of Russia in this case, if they understand each other, hopefully, they're trying to create something, a new phenomena, which would be called a world peace conference. So it will be equivalent of Yalta Potsdam Agreement at the end of Second World War. So now, admittedly, that Potsdam Yalta system is not working anymore. So you have to create something new that will be working, will be effective. And that's, of course, I will use countries, BRICS countries. They will use all kind of Turkey, who is member of NATO and supposedly second strongest army in the NATO, but they're using Turkey, and several other artists and actors. And it seems to me that this is strategically very, very unfavorable development for the United States, because they will be brought to the table where everything will be already decided. So, unfortunately, this is resulting in very ineffective foreign strategy of Biden's administration. Unfortunately, he has a power, but he doesn't project the power. That's a problem. Look at what's happened in the Middle East, and with all this now uh, American forces suffering losses, uh, 3 killed and several, like close to 40 wounded. And there's no response. I mean, there is a system that will be being prepared of massive response and so on. But you know what? It's one thing when you're talking about response, and another thing when you see the response. Right now, they are talking about response. So all that, and because Zelensky definitely will not support this political game, maybe that's another plus possible loss if the end of the war, if let's say Zelensky is successful and some kind of a new peace conference and so on, and okay, so Russia will take a piece of Ukraine and the war is over and so on, and all the world, United States and Red Cross and all others guarantee this peace. So then election in Ukraine will be called. And guess what? Zelensky will lose hands. So there's a Zelensky, the approval rating of Zaluzhny is about 88%, and Zelensky slightly over 50%. So you can guess who is going to win the election. So I think this is a tactical two prongs approach. Number one, to assure the winnable election, and number two, to get him out of the way, to have this some kind of a some kind of a peace conference. I don't know how to call it.
Any look, any uh, peace, and I put that in quotes, any peace that in any way, any visible way, rewards Russia for having started the war is
Absolutely.
not a treaty. It is not, cannot be called a peace treaty. That is
They
a,
call it.
it is,
Oh,
it's,
I remember, Jonathan. They call it not a peace treaty. They call it a new world order. That's what it is.
yeah, I remember that New World Order phrase. It was as phony then as it is now. And so, I realistically, uh, the United States should simply proceed with caution and skepticism about any proposal.
My reasoning is why this new world order, so called, it's a fiction simply because the old world order, which is Yalta Potsdam peace conference, there was a meeting of the winners. There was the decisive win in Second World War, which allowed the winners to formulate how the world will work and create a new United Nations and all that stuff. But today there are no winners, at least as
Right.
I'm concerned. So
So,
who
so
can?
any claim to establish a new world order could be looked upon as fundamentally illegitimate. And
Absolutely, there are no
and
winners.
and that exactly because there are no winners. And until uh, say the it's interesting that you note the competition between Zelensky and Zelensky, uh, potentially for you could almost draw a certain parallel between to the American Civil War between McClellan and Lincoln, because McClellan was a Democrat and Lincoln's a Republican, and uh, what the South was counting on was McClellan being able to unseat Lincoln in the 1864 election, because they lost their opportunity to achieve a military victory that would have compelled foreign intervention when they lost the Battle of Gettysburg.
Mhm.
So you have a situation now where you have one side. That is why the importance for Ukraine of achieving. I contend that the most important thing that the Ukraine can do for its own benefit is to use their military power and skills in the manner of a skillful counterpuncher, a skillful boxer. Look for that decisive opening, that decisive opportunity when they have possess the qualitative means to seize air superiority at the right moment over Crimea and Ukraine, and as well as timing it so that they can sever the operational, logistical, and reinforcement link between Russia and Crimea, sever that, achieve a clearly visible and decisive operational victory over a portion of the Russian Ukrainian front that will change not only the actual military balance, but also will change the political perception on the part of the Allies as well as Russia's potential allies as to who is likely to win this war and come out on top. And so, if again, Ukraine still has that opportunity, that window of opportunity, much as the South possessed a window of opportunity in the American Civil War. They tried two times to win a decisive military victory on northern soil, which was intended to encourage intervention in the American Civil War by England and or France, both those, and essentially duplicating the strategy that the American colonies executed in the Revolutionary War, when they were able to achieve enough victories to where France saw it worth their while to intervene in the American Revolution on the side of the colonists against Great Britain. So there are parallels. There are lessons, as the American humorist and political satirist Mark Twain once said, history doesn't repeat itself. It does rhyme, though.
Great, very great observation, of course. So there's interesting how all that developed, and I think Zelensky on his own would never take such a gamble as to unseat Zelensky, because it's a great blow to Ukrainian defense forces,
Mm-hmm.
because it definitely plays in the Russian hands. And I think Zelensky probably was encouraged by his people around him, like Yermak and others. And I think it's overall, I believe it's a great blow to Ukraine if such scenario will take place. The proceedings have not started; it's just announcements of all kinds. And but on the other hand, they're waiting for Zelensky to make his resignation, which he's not going to do it. So somehow they have to unseat him, fire him, or whatever else. And this is extremely not only risky, I would say it's ugly act on Zelensky's part. Incredible.
So it's a very delicate situation, very tenuous. it depends upon. We have to watch the military developments in the next, especially in these next couple of months, very closely, because there are indicators. You look at the tactical successes, the introduction of new weapons, the downing of aircraft, things which indicate that the qualitative balance is shifting in Ukraine's favor, and other developments that indicate that Ukraine's capacity to defend itself and to manufacture their own armaments and to do so in a very creative way, creative and innovative, in a way that exploits Russian weaknesses. All of these are subtle indicators which, when you look at them by themselves, they don't appear like they're very important. When you take them collectively and look at the entire pattern, which really takes some very careful analysis, when you look at the pattern, I would contend that the pattern is shifting in Ukraine's favor, and in such a way that the window of opportunity will soon open where Ukraine can inflict a decisive counterblow against Russian forces in the right spot, not just attacking for the sake of attacking or on any portion of the front, but in a portion of the front that will decisively influence the course and outcome of the war. So you have this situation now, which is, again, a growing number of Western military analysts are recognizing that if Ukraine is able to separate or sever the link between Russia and Crimea, that will, in fact, be a decisive development.
Yeah, and I'd like to mention two important news before we finish today's program. It's one, that European Union actually has already approved $50 billion
Ooh, nice.
Defense budget for Ukraine. And Victoria Nuland now is in Kiev. And what I read very briefly is that she announced some kind of a military help to Ukraine, including weapons that United States has never used yet.
Oh, right, that new development, the glide bombs.
I see. Yeah, I think she's right. So if that will be available and 50 billion euros, I think we probably should postpone the firing.
And you can just imagine how the Ukrainian military planners are practically, as the Russians used to say, rubbing their hands in glee, because now they have some new and weapons which the Russians are going to be completely unprepared for, and they have no way of the Russians really, at least from my perspective, are being continually surprised by Ukraine's innovativeness and creativity in responding to their counteroffensive, which they are ill prepared to deal with. So that is why, Sasha, I am confident that Ukraine still holds the keys, still holds its destiny in its own hands.
Totally agree with you, Jonathan. Thank you so much for today's program. I'm looking forward to our.
This has been a lively discussion.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Always enjoyed, and looking forward to see you on Tuesday, same place, same time. Slava Ukraini, and have a great weekend.
You do the same. Thank you.
Bye-bye.